Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear members of the organizing committee, ladies and gentlemen, Professor, thank you very much for all what you have said, explaining us all what we owe to water. And of course, thanks to Professor San Marco, we heard that if Italy and France have such good wines, it's precisely because they have extremely good water. Alas, a privilege which is not fairly distributed around the world, and this is what we must comment about this morning. I think it is particularly timely this year, in January 2015, to discuss these issues, and particularly the problem of the tremendous difficulties we have in creating the proper infrastructures for water. This year we will have two very important events. You remember and you know really well that 2015 is the deadline for the Millennium Development Goal on water. And of course, hard questions will be raised about what will have been achieved in this field of these two Millennium Development Goals, and what will have to be done on this issue, not that much as new Millennium Development Goals, but something which is very similar, namely the new Sustainable Development Goals till 2030. Then this year is also the year of the Paris World Conference on Climate and Sustainable Development, and water strategy will very soon appear as one of its critical parameters. The success of this event will very much depend on the ability of the key players to handle the close connection between water policies and climate policies. So water is really at the center of the work of the international community this year. But to start with, where are we at this very moment as far as water access and water sanitation are concerned? I would be very happy to comment a little bit with you. Of course, you could be a little bit surprised to see somebody coming from a central bank to be commenting on water issues. Don't be mistaken. It's not because water is a liquidity. But only because after leaving my responsibilities in the International Monetary Fund, I asked myself, what is the Millennium Development Goal on which now, as a free man, I should concentrate? And very soon I came to the view that water being life in all the cultures of the humanity, possibly I could devote part of the last few years of my lifetime in trying to promote more international efforts on water. Let's to concentrate on only three things. Where are we? What are the key issues to be addressed to respond to the most pressing problems in the field of water, and then how to finance the needed world infrastructures? Well, remember what are the pledges of the international community in this field. We pledged in 2000, in the framework of the Millennium festivities, we pledged to reduce by half the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water. All of that by 2015. And then 2 years after, we thought that, safe water is fine, but there is something extremely important for the dignity of the human being, sanitation of water. And then we pledged in Johannesburg to reduce by half the proportion of people without access to basic sanitation. Of course, there were discussions about what is basic sanitation. Finally, it has been reduced to toilets of minimal quality and decency. Well, since these pledges, a lot of work has been done. And this must be mentioned because if you look to the old record of United Nations initiatives and purposes during the last 50 years, you will see that water, in spite of being life, was the Cinderella among the purposes of the UN. So the fact that a change took place, and the fact that, and this was a very important turning point, by the end of 2010, the UN have decided to declare that access to safe water and sanitation was a human right, was, of course, a very important decision to help mobilize governments in making sure that their people rights are being recognized. But, well, a few important progresses can be identified, and I could say, for instance, that, access to what is called in the UN improved sources of water has been provided to 1 billion more people to improve source of water. We will come back on that. And on sanitation also, even if it is extremely difficult and costly compared to simply the access to water, then we can say that the proportion of the world population with no basic sanitation has been reduced from 51% in 1990 to 37% in 2012. It remains that more than 1/3 of the world population has no basic sanitation, hygienic toilets in the household. Okay, sadly enough, this means that the Millennium Development Goals have not been reached, but we must recognize that at the present time, we have to have permanently in mind several very cruel realities. More than 1 person in 3 in the world is still suffering hardship and indignity from the problem of water. More than 1 person on 3. And this person is much more often a woman than a man. Women continue to be exhausted by having to fetch water every morning. This creates a situation we have been verifying in Africa, that a woman in Africa works around 40 to 45, 50% more than men. Girls are frequently deprived of schooling because they want to help their mothers with their tasks, such as fetching water, or because they have to put up with a lack of privacy in school toilets. This is the reason why girls leave school around the age of 9. Nothing, we must have that clearly in mind, nothing is more harmful for the human progress in Africa and in the world, of course, than a girl missing the school. The whole future of the country is there at stake. This injustice is largely unspoken and one of the most difficult to rectify, precisely because it is above all an injustice to women. You will have the impression that I want to be faithful to the fashions and to show that gender is for me a concern. Not particularly, but here we must recognize facts. Let's continue with these cruel realities. Unhealthy water kills 2.2 million children each year. Half of Africa's beds in hospitals are filled with people suffering from a water-related disease. Slum dwellers pay up to 10 to 20 times a price for water, 20 times the price people living in the privileged areas of cities are paying. I could continue with this list of injustice in this field and realities which finally destroy the prospects of development in the poorest countries. But I believe we can live with that, only mentioning that very frequently, behind all these problems, at the roots of these problems, we have our negligence and our resignation in the face of inequalities among human beings. In fact, we continue 15 years after the declaration of the millennium, we continue witnessing the same dramatic paradox. While being key, if humanity wants to achieve all the other development goals of the millennium, in education, in health, etc., if we recognize that water is central to eliminate absolute poverty, water infrastructure, water investments continue lagging behind. I have been for 10 years a member of the United Nations Secretary General Advisory Board on water issues, and of course, we had been created precisely to monitor developments and the way in which we were approaching or not the Millennium Development Goals. And we had to deliver very recently to the Secretary General a very sobering report. And when asked about what should be now the priorities of the global community on water, we suggested 3 very simple objectives. 1, to achieve, finally, universal access to sustainable sanitation and to drinking water which is really safe. And I will tell you in a minute that improved water is not safe water. 2, increased wastewater management and pollution prevention. And 3, improve integrated water resources management and water use efficiently. And I was happy to see that in our program, Professor Michel will comment on this issue. Well, these three objectives are extremely dependent, of course, of the effectiveness of the efforts to solve the problem of financing for water infrastructures. And of course, I will come to that at the end of my presentation. A few words on these three objectives we have suggested to the Secretary General of the UN. Achieve universal access to sustainable sanitation and drinking water, which is really safe. Well, I must tell you, with a degree of uneasiness, that due to the lack of precision of the language of the Millennium Goal on access to water, the UN have created a degree of confusion. They have triumphantly said that the goal of improved water for all had been achieved. It was true. But what does it mean, improved water? Is water the human beings don't share, source of waters the human being don't share with animals. But it does not mean at all that it is safe drinking water. And at this very moment, in reality, the number of people lacking access to safe drinking water, in spite of a few progresses, is estimated, best estimate, to be at least 2 billion people. From there, our plea for now making sure that the water goal within the Sustainable Development Goals be a precise target to drinking water that is really safe. And for sanitation, of course, we are very far from targets, and here also we are pressing for a very strong language of the next Sustainable World Goal. I don't need to speak long on increasing efforts in the field of wastewater management and pollution prevention. This is extremely important. As the global population exceeds now 7 billion people, with an increasing number living in urban areas, managing wastewater and preventing water pollution is absolutely critical. In this area, part of the economic equation must include, of course, pollution prevention to enhance productivity of industry and agriculture. And if this is done right, we will then have a field where a host of green jobs will be created. But the task is enormous. Today, rough estimates, because one of the problems in the field of water, as in many others, is that statistics are very scarce. And a lot must be done to refine all the indicators of progress under the Millennium or the Sustainable Development Goal. If I had to suggest something as an important and valuable output of the next Paris conference, it would be this one: to have precise and universally accepted indicators of progress. Because if we have not that, well, governments will continue doing and giving priority to more popular sectors, while if they are monitored in an unquestionable language, and that the public opinion can raise the issue of the lack of progress in the domains of their pledges, their behavior will change radically, and we have already seen that with the first 15 years under Millennium Development Goal. So remember the magnitude of this problem of wastewater. These poor estimates we have suggest that 80 to 90% of wastewater in developing countries is untreated, particularly in the agricultural sector. I don't speak on the needed progress in the sector of integrated water resource management. You will hear about that this afternoon, but I only emphasize the fact that these three major objectives will require that enormous difficulties in the field, in the financial field, be properly addressed. I see that time is running, and I will rapidly come to the financial aspect of this problem. As I presume you expect that from a guy coming from the central bank. In one word, we are very far away from what should be spent in the field of water investments. I give you only one approximate figure. To be in line with the ambitions of the Millennium Development Goals, Africa should devote more or less 2.5% of its GDP to water infrastructures. At this stage, it is only 0.3%. So a huge effort is needed. It cannot be only the effort of African countries or developing countries. International financial institutions must join, donor countries should join, but you see that we must have a radical change in the concentration of the global community efforts in this field. Let's see what should be the financial strategy to be adopted, and what should be its key features to start with. Well, first, in view of its magnitude, this financial effort must involve all parties acting together, since in the past they have too often tended to shift responsibilities to each other. The problem needs to be tackled at global level and can only be solved if all the various parties accept the need to change their approach, in some cases radically. Second, financial flows will have to come from a real great diversity of sources, from financial markets, from water authorities themselves, through tariffs in particular, from multilateral financial institutions, from government, from private sector, etc. But governments will have a central role, and to maximize finance from other sources, governments will need to look first at mobilizing more domestic finance and to encourage as much as they can more domestic savings. It is crystal clear that this is critical, and if you look at the way in which our own countries in Europe have finally solved these problems of water infrastructure, it is basically through the contribution of domestic savings, well intermediated by financial markets. Governments must also foster more and more dialogue between public authorities and private investors. This is crucial not only to forge public-private partnership, but also to tap the potential of private capital markets to fund large projects. In spite of all the efforts of the last few years, I must tell you that I will be unable to tell you how much will have to be found and how much each group of contributors, governments, donors, international financing should contribute. Nobody knows that. We lack basic statistical information, and you will certainly hear about beautiful programs to be financed in that way and that way, provided each X makes 10 times more than Y, etc. All of that has no serious grounds. The only thing we can say is what kind of progress each of the potential actors could develop in the next few years, and I will limit myself to that, starting by government of developing and emerging countries. Without in any way intending to minimize the needed contribution of advanced countries, it is obvious that developing and emerging countries' governments will have to bear the most important part of the brunt of a global effort on water infrastructure. Even before considering the financial dimension of the problem, major efforts remain to be undertaken to avail many of these governments with the proper internal organization and programming capacity which is needed to face their own responsibility in responding to the rights of their populations to access to water and sanitation. This simple effort at organizing themselves is critical. In many countries, it is not there. And of course, with this being recognized, this effort of proper management of the resources of the countries and of the equipment of the countries already existing, this already have an important payoff. It will, for instance, allow to start with dramatic reduction of waste and inefficiencies in the managing of the existing resources. Of course, a major strategic option will also consisting in putting equity and gender at the core of both water infrastructure and climate programs, as you have there the more cruel problems. Let me add that the current approaches to new and innovative financing will certainly be mentioned with enthusiasm and keen interest during the coming negotiations, but we must be careful and not to be too enthusiastic about that, because if it's true that there is a big potential there, these new and innovative financing are slow in achieving their aims, partly because they are failing to address what may be the single greatest barrier to infrastructure financing in Africa, and this barrier is a shortage, lamentably a shortage of bankable projects. Governments need to concentrate efforts in producing, with the help of the private sector and all operators there, a good pipeline of projects for the abundant world saving ready to be invested to find convincing problems to finance. This is still lacking. And for giving you an example, while we would need hundreds of billions of private investments in the field of water, frequently under the forms of public-private partnership, at this very moment, you have only $3 billion a year of public-private partnership in this domain of water. Well, and then you have the proper responsibilities of governments in managing their budgets, and here decisive choices should be considered. They must reallocate resources more rationally. Let me take an example. In Africa, for instance, according to the IMF, around 2.8% of GDP are devoted to costly energy subsidies, which tend to favor elites and the middle class in the city, while these resources could be put at a much better social use by utilizing these resources as an incentive for water basic infrastructures. And in the same vein, I should mention the regime of wasteful fiscal exemptions for extractive industries. And of course, I will insist on that, but I'm sure that there or another, this foundation will see how to make a better job to reduce the tremendous and dramatic regime of the financing of these industries, which at the end of the day produces losses of domestic resources through their export of capitals through offshore centers and so on, which are much more important than what the ODA provides to Africa. But this is only for having further work in this domain. But I don't want to lose too much time. Another sector where things should be changed and where national resources, domestic resources, could be found is the domain of the tariff policies. Here, the generalization of policies based on sustainable cost recovery principles and individually targeted and transparent pro-poor policies will be key for the implementation of long-term infrastructure programs. Such policies should pay also due regard to the funding of recurring costs, which are frequently totally ignored according to the present practices, and indeed with tremendous problem of maintenance later on in the life of the infrastructures. I insist in efforts to develop and facilitate the investment of local savings in the field of water. There are no reasons to consider that policies of issuance of municipal bonds, for instance, to finance urban water infrastructure, could not provide a significant higher contribution than so far. Of course, this would require active government policy to modernize or to create local financial markets to avoid to crowing down other borrowers through their own financial policies for their own government needs, and of course taking steps to permit the development of domestic borrowing market for sub-sovereign, namely municipalities and so on, who are frequently the key operators in the field of water infrastructures. All of that will, of course, require significant contributions of multilateral financial institutions in the forms of technical assistance to speed up this modernization or creation and financial market. But these world institutions could also redouble their efforts to correct frequently overblown perceptions of risk and strengthening integration of regional markets. This brings me to the role of the international financial institutions, which are close to my heart, as you could imagine. They can, with the leadership of African Development Bank and of the World Bank, they can play a much more important role, not only by augmenting their own direct contribution. They can play an important role, in particular, through the products of for mitigation the risks. They should, together with other agencies, extend the use of these guarantees to facilitate the issue of local currency bonds, to promote local capital markets, to extend the maturity of local loans, and to encourage the use of local pension funds, particularly in the water sector. This role in the mitigation of risk could be one of the key features of their action in the next few years. If they do that, as they are pressed to do, then it would be important, and pardon me for being to come to a rather technical problem, but it is important. It should be appropriate also for them to reconsider their current policy of full capital provisioning for guarantees, despite their nature as contingent liabilities, which is arguably an excessive limit to the use of guarantees. This is a point we have been making since a very long time, but you cannot imagine the resistance of the legal advisors of these institutions. But, well, we must be more persistent than they are, I think. The role of the multilateral financial institution must be also underlined as far as the multi-purpose investments are concerned. This is, of course, a particularly important problem, as, to come back to Africa, there are a great number of projects of big size which are transboundary, and this, of course, is creating this has so many legal features, complex ones, which makes almost impossible finally the preparation of the needed investments, in spite of the enormous transboundary water resources of the continent. There are progresses in this domain, and for instance, what the World Bank is presently doing in partnership with China to finance and put in and develop a first tranche of the project of INGA in the Republic Democratic of Congo can be a very important example for the future. Now, let's turn to our countries as foreign donors. Of course, we all know that the official development assistance is going down with the pretext of our own difficulties due to the crisis, but it is undeniable that official development assistance will have to continue to play a role in this field. Why? Well, because there are investments highly productive, but which cannot be realized without a grant element. Let me take only one example. Primary schools for water in remote regions of Africa. Possibly the place of the future of Africa is being at stake. Well, you will not create these schools without a major grant element. And from where grants should come, particularly from our countries. Well, this being said, the bad news is this stagnation of official development assistance. There is nevertheless a good piece of news, namely the fact that within the operation financed by official development assistance, the share of water is being increased. It was more or less 4% in 1990, and it is now around 8%, reaching recently $8 billion, which is not insignificant, but which is, of course, which should be an amount which should be increased. It is good to mention that within this $8 billion, 40% has been given to the poorest countries. One of the forms also of the investment of ODA for water in the near future, in view of the present financial reality, should be probably its blending with debt finance and other investment flows, so attracting private investors and softening borrowers' terms. In a period of time when donor countries face budget constraints, this is a good way of getting the highest possible impact from insufficient grant resources. This blending policy can involve a vast array of instruments that mix concessional finance, grants or loans with a grant element, with debt finance and other investment flows. And the European Union has been in the forefront of developing blending financing recently. But of course, one must be nevertheless prudent. This is not at all a miracle solution, and there are concerns for instance, that blending could make, in some cases, development finance less affordable and less available to the poorest countries. As donors reallocate aid towards leveraging private finance, there is a danger that recipient countries will have to fund infrastructures through more expensive loans, and then, of course, being unable to serve as needed the poorest segments of the population. There is a remaining question which will be very much debated this year when considering the magnitude of the financing need we face and the fact that grant resources are needed in significant proportion. Then the question remains to be faced: of the creation of a special tax in industrialized countries, in advanced countries, for instance, on financial transactions. Well, you know that this is a highly debated, deeply debated debate within the European Union. My own country wanted to take the lead on that, but the suggestion we made were not welcomed by many, possibly because they were not the right ones, and the issue will be debated again this year. I must tell you that the more I go deep in trying to shed some light on this financing of infrastructure, the more I think that we should be serious in considering this suggestion. Well, now I see that I am approaching the time limit, and I see my neighbor on my left here from time to time watching its watch. I must conclude. Well, all of this suggests a simple conclusion, that all key actors must reconsider and significantly increase their contribution if the new sustainable development goals for water are to be met. We live in the world, of course, that is increasingly discovering its limitations, including in the field of water, but water is life. Then this means that the central role of water policy will have to be increasingly recognized, and we shouldn't be exceedingly pessimistic about the possibilities of the global community to face this problem. The world is capable of this effort, and indeed I must say that it is encouraging to see that institutions as yours, and in particular the Foundation Enrico Mattei, join the world effort in this critical domain. What is at stake is of decisive importance. What is at stake is the possibility for women and poor people, particularly farmers in Africa, to realize their potential and to contribute to inclusive growth and food security, in one word, in what is at the heart of well-being of people. Thank you very much.